guys. Sorry I couldn't be here today. To make it up to you, I wanted to give you the option of watching me or listening to me talk through the PowerPoint, so I did go ahead and make this for you all really quickly. We've already been talking about the 1920s. We've learned a little bit of the good and the bad that has to do with the 20s. But today we're going to keep talking about the 20s. Again, some of today is good, some of it's bad. It really just depends on who you were during the time period and what you were experiencing. Really, the two big groups that we need to talk about are women and African Americans, because some of their life is changing in a good way during this time and some of their life is changing in a bad way. So those are the two groups we're going to focus on, and we're going to start with women. Because one of the most famous images from the 1920s is the image of what's called the flapper, which is young women during the time who are being more rebellious. So the first big question that is there for us in the graphic organizer to answer is, why did some women reject the values and gender expectation of the past? So in the 1920s, you have some younger women who are like, I don't like the way that women have always had to live their lives. I don't like the way that, gender roles have been working. So they want to change some stuff. And there's really two different reasons why women during this time are starting to reject some of those older expectations. The first one actually has to do with marriage. So during the 1920s, we're going to see that there are more like work areas that women can focus on, and just other things they can do. So you have some women who figure out they don't ever want to be married, or some women who realize they can marry a little bit later in life. So instead of being married at 18, they can marry at 26, 27, and have a few more years of independence and freedom. So marriage is going to play a little bit of a role into this, because they, are trying to break out from the traditions of the past. The other big reason why is, if you think about what we've talked about with the 1920s, is there's a lot of consumerism and prosperity, and I can go buy things, and I can go on road trips, and I can go on these adventures. And so a lot of these women want to do that, maybe for their entire lives, or some just for the time that they are young. They would rather be doing that and experiencing their freedom than going into those gender expectations of the past. So, the new ideal for some young women, not for every young woman, is known as the flapper. Now, the flapper is different from anything we had seen in the past, both with appearance and with actions. So we're going to start with appearance first. You can kind of see this if you're looking at the pictures. This lady on the top photo is supposed to be 1900, okay? So this is what your stereotypical woman looked like in 1900. Our bottom two ladies are 1920. So this is your stereotype for the 1920s, and you can see there's quite a lot of difference between these two. But our new young ladies, our flappers down here at the bottom, they have short hair, so they've cut their hair. If you're a girl, you probably have heard of a bob haircut before. If you're a guy, it's a short haircut. Their dresses are shorter, so you can see this woman's dress here ends at about her knee. These women, you can probably tell, are wearing makeup, which is not something that women would actually have done previous to this. Women wearing makeup was not really a thing in America earlier on. It just was typically a sign of bad moral character if you were a woman who wore makeup. These women also aren't wearing a corset. So this woman, you can kind of tell, is these two ladies, especially the one standing up, are not. And again, they're trying to be a little bit rebellious kind of situation. They're also wearing high heels, which women hadn't really been wearing high heels prior to this. It's obviously something that happens in the 20s that's going to carry on for ladies. So a lot of the things that we're seeing them do will become pretty normal for women nowadays, but was very new for women as of the 1920s. Now, that is their appearance, which you can tell is very different, but they also have a lot of actions that are very different as well. So these young women down here, our flappers, would go out dancing to jazz music. They would be going on dates. They would be acting a little bit more rebellious because they would be smoking. They would be drinking at our speakeasies, even though prohibition is going on. And they would also be driving cars. So they're doing things that women weren't really supposed to do. So that's what makes those things kind of rebellious. Now, how realistic is this image? not really the most realistic. There aren't a lot of women that are flappers during the 20s, even though anytime you see like a movie set in the 20s, they assume that every woman was a flapper. That's not true. It's a very, very small group of young women who actually fit this like stereotype of women during the 20s. So it's not really the best representation of women during the 20s, but it is a way to show you how women are trying to start changing their role in society. And the women who do decide to be flappers are also facing a lot of criticism. They feel like, or not they, but society feels like they are showing a lot of immoral behavior with the things like smoking and drinking. They are accused very frequently of acting like men because of smoking and drinking and driving cars. And they also obviously have a much more shocking appearance than what we had been used to prior. So that is another kind of thing that comes at them. Now, even though this is the stereotype for the 20s, it's not really how every woman is. So I do need to kind of make a little bit more of a general point as to, what more women are experiencing. So a woman's life in the 1920s has some new options. So the first thing I want to talk about is the workforce. So after World War I is over, you actually have more women who end up deciding to stay in the workforce. Now, not as many as we'll see happen after World War II, but there is a little bit after World War I of that happening as well. So some of these had been careers available to women before World War I, but a lot of them are being opened up now that the war is over. So women could become teachers, they could become nurses, librarians, secretaries, store clerks. We have, department stores like Macy's that are developing, as well as working on the assembly line, although that one is much less likely because factories stay predominantly male heavy. So there are some new job opportunities out there for women. You can kind of see this room full of secretaries over here typing away on their typewriters, okay? The other thing is that higher education actually becomes more available for women as well. Colleges are opening up, some of them specifically just for women, but also other colleges that have been around are opening up buildings or areas that they'll let women into. So we do have more women that are going to college, and that's feeding into a lot of these different careers. So like to become a teacher or a nurse or a librarian, like you have to have some education. So that is definitely an avenue for some women during this time. Again, not every woman is doing this, not even a lot, but some women are doing these things. Now, I do want to make a point that even though women are able to get jobs in some of these different careers, they're not being paid the same, so they are facing some discrimination, and they're not really going to be able to hold every job. So I could be a teacher, but you didn't have female principals at this time. Women could be nurses, but women are not very likely to be doctors. Some schools will let them become a doctor, but then they couldn't find jobs being hired as a doctor. So yeah, there's a lot of discrimination and inequality when it comes to these women who are trying to go into the workforce or even into education, because not every college is going to be accepting of women. Now, the other thing we need to mention is that at the very beginning of this decade, 1920, which we've already talked about this, but women gained the right to vote. So how is that going to help women during this time? Really, it gives them political power. So women have that political power. They now can kind of reach out to those politicians and lawmakers and push for better reform. So one of the reforms that they'll get on board with pretty much right away is economic equal rights. The idea of a man and a woman, if they're doing the same work, they should be paid the same, which is something that women over time continue to fight for. So that is, we're starting to see women become much more active politically too. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before I move on to African Americans is home life. So how did home life change for women? We do have some new ideas about marriage at this time, having equality in marriage where a husband and wife are a team, marriage based on love and companionship. So like marriages are becoming a little bit stronger during this time. We also have newer household technologies. So things like vacuum cleaners and washing machines that everyone teased me for using as examples last week are definitely helping women because doing household chores is less time heavy now. Now, the thing that I really want to point out, that's why I've underlined it, is that even though it seems like things are becoming new and women are becoming more independent, honestly, it is still expected by most people that women are the ones who are responsible for raising the children and keeping the household. So even though women could become a teacher, like they're still expected to be taking care of their own kids in their own household, okay? So as much as we might like to think that things are changing, like there's not as much change going on as we actually tend to think. All right, so African-American life, we're going to start with the South. So in the South, African-Americans are faced with three things: sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, and violence. So sharecropping is an agricultural system where poorer farmers actually don't own the land, and they're working the land that a landowner holds. So the farmer who's doing all the work is actually receiving a share of the harvest as payment, which means that farmer is bound to the land and has very limited economic opportunity because they can't like move and buy more land. Now, Jim Crow laws are actually letting segregation happen, and we have mentioned these before, so I'm not going to go too in depth, but just remember that they're separate everything for black and white people. And any African American who tries to stand up against any of this is going to be facing violence. So that's going to encourage a lot of African Americans to move north. So we're going to have this thing happen in the 1910s and 1920s called the Great Migration, which is when tons of African Americans are going to move north. Now, most of those African Americans move for job opportunities because we have factories and stuff in the north, but also to escape some of those conditions in the South that aren't good. All right. Now, even though they're trying to run away from bad conditions in the South, that doesn't mean that they're going to have great conditions in the North. So a lot of these African Americans will be discriminated against in the North too. They'll have race riots that go on, which leads to a lot of death and destruction. The biggest summer where that happens is the summer of 1919, that actually becomes known as the Red Summer because of how many people die in these race riots. We'll also see a lot of discrimination going on. There will be segregation in housing. African Americans won't be welcomed into certain jobs. So there's still a lot of things that African Americans are facing even as they move north. Now, also as African Americans are moving north, though, we are seeing some positives. So the Harlem Renaissance is actually going to happen, which is a development of art, literature, and music that kind of spreads African American culture. So we're actually getting a chance in history to celebrate African American life. One of the biggest things that comes out of the Harlem Renaissance is actually jazz music. It actually started down in New Orleans, but the Harlem Renaissance is going to spread it across the United States. So this is a new type of music that's going to impact everyone. So African Americans are developing this, but it's going to impact white people because they'll be listening to it as well. Now, a couple of people to mention here that belong to the Harlem Renaissance movement. Langston Hughes is our first gentleman up there, pictured. He is a poet and an author, okay, very, very famous during this time frame. Our second person is another author. Her name is Zora Neale Hurston. She's going to write a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God, which showcases the lives of African Americans during this time. Our third gentleman up there, you might be able to tell from the photo, is Louis Armstrong. He's a jazz musician and a trumpet player. And then I have some others listed here for you as well. But all of these are African-American artists who are able to kind of spread and celebrate African-American culture because of the Harlem Renaissance. The last guy that we need to talk about really quickly is an African-American politician during the 1920s, and his name is Marcus Garvey. He actually creates the Universal Negro Improvement Association to try to unite Africans who had been removed from Africa, which, if you're thinking about slavery in America, that pretty much describes the way that every African-American got here. He thinks that they need to unite to establish a country of their own, which is also referred to as Black nationalism, so the idea of creating a new nation for Black people. Under Garvey and through this Black nationalism idea, we're actually going to have a large group of African Americans who move back to Africa, specifically to a country called Liberia. Now, Garvey is actually very controversial during his lifetime. The American government is spying on him because we feel like he's kind of on that anarchism, communism, Red Scare spectrum. He's also very controversial amongst African Americans because it feels like he's trying to take people who are born and raised in America and actually send them away. So very controversial figure during this time. That's all I have for you, so hopefully your graphic organizer is all filled out and ready to go. Remember to go ahead and do the survey over this information, and then the last thing that you need to do is our quiz. I'll see you all next time we meet. Bye.